Can you pledge that the Justice Department will always act independently of the White House?
Well, there's a big difference between saying we will always do our job and investigate any case and act independently of the White House. No, I'm not going to pledge that. And no attorney general should ever pledge that. The president, I mean, if I were to pledge I will be independent of the White House, what that means is that if President Trump says, I want the Department of Justice to go after every violent criminal in this country, which is what he has said, what you're saying to me is I should say, no, sir, I'm not going to do it.
On President Trump's first day in office, as you know, he pardoned everyone who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, including 172 people who pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers. How is that consistent with your pledge to always protect law enforcement?
There's nothing inconsistent about that.
On January 6th, police officers were beaten with baseball bats and flagpoles. Do you believe it was wrong to pardon the people who assaulted police officers on January 6th, given that you have vowed to protect law enforcement?
Every attorney general vows to protect law enforcement, including me. And so, no, I'm not opining or in any way saying what President Trump did is wrong. Absolutely not. By the way,
isn't it inconsistent with what you said, though? Is
absolutely not.
There's a difference. Pledge?
No, there's a difference between saying we will prosecute anybody. If later a president chooses to pardon that individual, that is the president's right under our Constitution.
What message does it send to police officers that people who assaulted them were pardoned?
The message to police officers is consistent and same every single day, which is that we will protect you.
No, it's not. No, it's absolutely not. That's not the message you're sending. The message that you're sending and the president you're working with is beat the hell out of cops. Have their families say that led to their deaths. Spend an entire day where cops are targeted, beaten, brutalized, choked, tased, shot with bear spray, and then they're going to get off scot-free? Come on, Todd. You know that's just bullshit. You know what happens when you tell cop beaters that they're going to get away with it? I mean, what you're doing is you're sending a message not just to cops that you're not going to back them up. You're sending a message to criminals. You're sending a message to the bad guys that there is no such thing as law and order with this White House. There is no such thing of taking care of cops if somehow that gets in the way of your own political ambitions. There is no justice for cop beaters. There is no consequence to those actions. You know, John Lemire, these cop beaters, these people that tried to overthrow a Democratic election that Donald Trump's own people said was the safest and cleanest election in American history. A lot of these cop beaters, who of course all got pardoned. I know this won't shock you because, I mean, I know you're not supposed to say law and order because that freaks some people out, but I like law. I like order. And when you have Donald Trump, like pardoning cop beaters, all of that falls apart. And those cop beaters, those thugs, those convicts are sent a message. It's a very clear message. And so what's happened since then? Well, I mean, I'm not going to read the whole rap sheet because it goes on far too long. The cop beaters and the mob that all got pardoned, they've committed one crime after another crime after another crime. Here's some of them: child molestation charges, home break-ins for robbery, threats to kill Hakeem Jeffries. They've been arrested for all of these things. A conspiracy to murder FBI agents. And here's one that's not a big shock: threatening the life of a D.C. cop on the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th riots. It's just like, again, these people are clowns. They're dangerous clowns, but they're clowns all the same. They talk about law and order. They talk about protecting police officers, and yet they go out of their way to protect and defend and now want to pay cop beaters, people who beat police officers. Donald Trump wants these cop beaters paid. And so, of course, what flows from that, any conservative, any real conservative like me, not the clowns, 75% of the Republican Party that say, oh, nothing happened on January 6th. Real conservatives like me understand you let thugs get away with beating the hell out of cops, bad shit's gonna happen. And it's happening. Whether it's child molesting, whether it's threats to cops, whether it's threats to political leaders, bad shit's gonna happen. And it keeps happening because Donald Trump decided to take all of those people who rioted, all of those cop beaters, and pardon them. And now he's got an attorney general that says that's okay.
Pardons, potential payments, and also a permission structure to perhaps do this again. That's why this is so troubling to so many people. For more, let's bring in MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. And there's this Todd Blanche defending what's happened there with these January 6th rioters certainly adds to the concern that he is simply going to do President Trump's bidding, something, frankly, he didn't dispute over the weekend, where he made it very clear he does not think there should be any sort of bright line between the Department of Justice and the West Wing.
No, and he tried to conflate the lack of bright line that he sees with what has gone on in past presidential administrations, saying, of course, no other attorney general would pick up the phone and say to a president, no, this is an inappropriate conversation, Mr. President. But that is, in fact, exactly what has happened. Now, in between those moments of sort of national gaslighting, when Todd Blanche was saying that the message to cops is consistent, there was some remarkable truth-telling, Jonathan, too, and I think people should take at face value what Todd Blanche is saying. I think he is telling the truth when he says that the president doesn't call him and say, prosecute X person or Y person. I think Donald Trump is too smart to have those conversations, and Todd Blanche is too smart to be on the receiving end of them. That doesn't mean that there is not a shared goal with respect to prosecuting the president's political enemies. That doesn't mean that there's not a shared goal with respect to embarrassing certain people, with respect to things like the reflecting pool cases and continuing to keep Davy Hearn's name in all of our mouths. The fact that he says that there is no bright line, we should believe him when he says that, because he means it. And I believe he is genuine when he thinks there is nothing wrong with that as well. Their conception of the unitary executive is consistent with a president that is allowed to call the Department of Justice and say what his wishes is and have those wishes granted.
Yeah, there's no question he sees a chance to expand that presidential power. So, Lisa, speaking of the Department of Justice, you've also been looking at and doing some reporting about how just frankly the DOJ doesn't seem ready for prime time. There's so many moments now where they've had lawyers appear in court, stand before judges, seemingly ill-equipped to do the job and or with the right facts, and been really admonished from the bench for wasting everybody's time and unprofessionalism almost.
Absolutely. And I think we tend to think about the Department of Justice sort of through two paradigms, right? Incompetence or malevolence. And I'm going to submit to you that we don't have to choose between the two of them. The Department of Justice is deliberately sending in trial lawyers who have limited experience and also have limited insight into how decisions are being made, so that when they go into court and a judge says, explain to me how X or Y or Z happened, the person genuinely does not know what happened and has no other information to provide. The latest example of this is in our former colleague Katie Fang's lawsuit against the department to force the release of more unredacted Jeffrey Epstein-related files. And last week, a department lawyer named Andrew Block, who's also been involved in defending these anti-weaponization fund cases, went into court and essentially had no new information to provide to a judge who's been on the bench for almost 42 years, Emmett Sullivan in the District of D.C. And he was flabbergasted because he had specifically issued an order telling them, come to court to prepared to tell me why you haven't produced foreign language documents, or come to court, give me documents that is sufficient for me to know that these people you say are victims are indeed victims. They did none of those things. At the end, Judge Sullivan reminded them he is the only judge in that circuit he believes to have ever imposed civil contempt on Department of Justice lawyers in a case involving former Senator Ted Stevens. He said, this is not a threat. This is a promise. My obligation is to uphold the law. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed by Congress and is my obligation as a judge to enforce that law just like any other law.